Thank you and welcome to the call tonight. I am excited that you're here. So tonight it's going to be just a call. We're just going to talk about some stuff. Real estate sales contracts. This is an area that most of us as investors want to improve on as we go along every single day, everything that we can do. So with talking about real estate sales contracts, we're going to go in and look at a couple of areas that I have built for you and what we have in place on that. So let me share the screen here real quick. And we'll get that present, share screen. There we go. All right. So real estate sales contracts. So real estate sales contracts, what contracts do you use? All of us that are investors, we have our favorite contracts that we use. We have some contracts that we may not care for, and that's okay. So with that, I normally will use the promulgated sales contracts from the real estate board of the state that I'm doing business in. And the reason I do that is because the title companies are familiar with that. If anything ever happened and you had to go to court, the judge is going to be familiar with that, whatever it may be on that basis. So, like I said, I use the real estate sales contracts that I've put together here, promulgated. Now, you can use other contracts too, and it's whatever your title company is going to be, comfortable with. But I want to make sure that when I do business, I have a contract that I don't stammer around on, and I don't not understand it. So what I have here is I put up a screen here out of my subject to account, but they're all related. This is just the easiest way for me to pull this up for you. But as you can see here, I've got several promulgated contracts in here from other states that I do business in. So I have, like I said, in Texas, I'm going to use the truck contract. In Arkansas, I'm going to use Arkansas. Louisiana, I'm going to use Louisiana. Oklahoma, I'm going to use Oklahoma. If I'm in South Dakota, I'm going to use South Dakota. So, and they're fairly simple to find. They're fairly simple to put into place. And what I want you to do is whatever contract you decide to use, and there's some generic ones out there that are very good. So when I do an investment property, first of all, I'm going to open it up with a letter of intent. That letter of intent is just essentially a synopsis of the contract. It's the synopsis of what I have in the contract itself. Okay. Who I am, who the sellers are, what the property address is, and then we go into the terms of the contract. If it's a cash sale, we're going to do that. If it's a owner finance sale, we're going to do that. If it's a subject to, we're going to add that in there. If it's a combination and a hybrid of any of those above, we're going to do that. So, for instance, I'm negotiating on a contract today that is going to be a partial subject to and a partial note that we pay every month to the seller. And so they got a lot of equity in that house. So they get some equity out of the house. I'm not having to come to the table with a bunch of equity up front. I'm covering all the closing costs. So I just want to, so we have that in place. If you're buying a property, let me throw this in there real quick. If you're buying a property from, let's say, a HUD property, which is on their own website, you're going to use their contracts. If you're going to be buying a property that is a REO property, a bank-owned property, it's already been foreclosed on, the banks are generally going to want you to use their contracts. And you need to be careful about these contracts that you're working with and understand how they work. For instance, on a HUD, you're probably going to put down 1% as earnest money. And HUD, being you're an investor, HUD doesn't mess with you. HUD's going to sit here and say, okay, there's not going to be an option period in here. You buy the property as is. You're not going to ask us for any repairs. You're not going to ask us to reduce the price later. So we just want to make sure that you understand that when you buy a HUD-owned property from the government, it's all black and white. There's no gray area in there at all. And you're going to be, you can do an inspection on the property and find out at that point, the property has no, somebody's gone in and stolen all the electrical lines out of it, all the copper out of the house. Let's say that. And you didn't know that when you looked at it. But the way HUD looks at it, it says, oh, you know what? You need to make sure that you're an investor and you need to make sure that you understand how this works. And you should have already known that before you even put an offer on this property. So, once again, I advocate never put a blind bid. You can put a blind bid in, but don't put a property under contract that you've never walked the property. Okay. Really important on that. So, so there's some other areas in there that you are forced to use other types of contracts, but only if it's from the seller, and that's periodically going to, or primarily going to be the subject to, or the bank or the HUD, or VA sometimes. Sometimes VAs will normally use, or sometimes use just the standard. In our case in Texas, the TREC contract. In Oklahoma, it's going to be the Oklahoma contract, Louisiana, etc. So once again, why a state realtor's contract? Okay, so all the state real estate boards have these contracts that I do business in. There's some states out there that I've not looked this up, but in all the occasions I've done business in Texas and the surrounding states, and in Florida and some other areas, there's a state real estate board. You can go in Texas, it's called the Texas Real Estate Commission, and TREC for short, and we can go in there and we can pull documents off that website that are free because it's supported by the taxpayers. So those documents are free. I have found that to be the case in every state that I've looked at. Those documents are always going to be free. So you want to look at those and make sure that you have those documents in place. And then once again, I said this earlier, but every title company and every attorney, every other, most all investors you work with, all are going to be familiar with that state contract. Okay. So I also really advocate that whatever contract you use, you get very familiar with that contract. You want to learn that contract inside and out. The last thing you want to do is be fumbling around at a seller's property, not understanding what the contract says and not understanding how the contract is put together. So that's why we use a state realtor's contract. Okay. So you can Google state real estate board. So if you're in Kansas, you can type in Kansas Real Estate Board, whatever it may be. Now in Texas, we have two boards. We have the TREC, Texas Real Estate Commission, and we have the TAR, Texas Association of Realtors. TAR is not a government agency. That is a realtor-based agency. You can't get contracts from that. Okay, but you can get contracts from these others. But I once again, really advocate using a letter of intent. The reason I do that is I want it to be short and sweet. Normally, a letter of intent is going to be 1 or 2 pages. You get them to sign it. Then you come back at the next day or whatever and say, hey, you know what? I was talking to the title company and they really want me to put this on the state promulgated real estate contract. So everything that was in this first letter is in the other is in the new contract. Okay, so I don't want to hit the seller up with 20 pages of contracts because they're like, oh my gosh, this is that. We're not used to doing contracts. We've never done a contract in our life on anything, and we just don't like it. There's too much here. So you start out with the letter of intent, and then you gradually move that into a contract, get them under contract to make that happen. So, they just they have that in there. Now, anybody can write up their own contract if you are a party to the transaction. Okay, you can't write up a contract for somebody else if you're not an attorney. Just be aware of that because you're practicing law. Can the seller get out of the contract? Yeah, seller can get out of the contract, but only in instances where they're willing to compensate the buyer. So if you put a property under contract and they decide they don't want to sell it, In most cases, I'm just going to let them go away because I don't want to deal with somebody I don't want to work with, or that they don't want to work with me, for instance. But I'll look at it, and if they're in there and they have a situation where they're selling it to another investor, I'm going to want to be reimbursed for my time and my trouble on that. So once they have signed that contract, they are locked in. You can get out for pretty much any reason whatsoever. You can cancel that contract. You can do the due diligence. You can find out there's title issues or whatever it may be. But once the seller has signed that contract as a contract, not letter of intent, but the actual contract, they are locked in. They need to understand that's the case and that you're going forward with the closing. Once again, it's not a good idea to work with somebody that doesn't want to work with you. It just creates a lot of problems there and a lot of issues. But if you find out, oh yeah, they're selling to another investor that offered them a few dollars more, then you can go and say, hey, you know what? I've got a legal binding contract here. It's already at the title company. They've already opened title on it. And if you want to reimburse me my time and my effort, you don't get stupid on it, but you want to reimburse me my time and my effort and other things on here, we can put that in place. So as a buyer, yes, you can cancel the contract anytime you want to cancel that contract. Okay. So we have that in place, and that's why we have an option period in our contract or due diligence period. I've seen that in most other states too. Texas put it in place back 20-something years ago, and it is a great clause in the contract that you can get out for any reason whatsoever within that time frame. If it's past that time frame, then you might have to pay some compensation. You may have to pay the seller for the time that you've taken it off the market. You may have to pay the seller, some other expenses. So you have that into place, and then and you make that, like I said, once again, you make that happen. So this is right here is kind of an example of a Texas real estate contract. Your state, if you're in another state, is going to be very much the same. So you're going to put the full name of the seller, and of course your name or the company name in here. That name, your buying name, can be changed at any time, and all of the Texas contracts, the TREC contract, are assignable. You don't have to put in there as is assigned, but if you're buying it and you decide you're going to put it in an LLC, or you're buying it, you decide, hey, this isn't the property for me, but Joe wants it. I'll sell it to Joe, and I'll make me a quick $1,000 or $2,000 by assigning that Joe will pay me for that contract. And it can be signed over. You can't do that with banks. Okay. Be aware of that. Banks will not allow you to put the contract under your name, like a HUD contract, or a bank-owned property, because what they don't want to happen is they don't want the seller to wind up buying the property through a friend, through a family member. Okay. They're losing the property to foreclosure. Kind of the way that happened over the years ago. Kind of the way that happened was it was called strategic foreclosures, and it was kind of a fringe area of that strategic foreclosure realm, happening a lot in Vegas and Phoenix back in the subprime days. Is somebody would own a house, and the house is worth $350,000. They bought it for $350,000. They're paying a mortgage on it for $350,000. And down the block is the same builder, built the same floor plan, has a different color front door, whatever it may be, and it's a foreclosure. And the bank is selling that property for $150,000. People would buy that property for $150,000 and just walk away from the house that they had $350,000 on. So they just walk away from that debt. But what you're looking for, what the banks are looking for, is they don't want that original property at $350,000. They don't want it to go into foreclosure, and then their brother-in-law puts a contract on it and then assigns the contract back to the original owner. The original owner gets their property back for $150,000. That's fraud, and you can get in trouble for that. Okay. Also, let's go back and revisit the HUDs real quick. HUD has 2 bidding periods in there. They have an owner-occupant period, which takes priority. And if you're an investor, you cannot bid on that property while it's an owner-occupant property. So just be aware of that. So now we're looking at here, we're looking at what you're going to put in there. So you need to go on the tax records, and you need to look at the tax records, and you need to determine, I need the lot number, I need the block number, I need the subdivision, what city it's in, what county that city is in, and the address, the street address of that. So you need to make sure you have all that in place, because there's going to be a Main Street in every town, an Elm Street in every town, and if all you put in there is 123 Elm Street, then it's going to you're going to run into a situation that you have that you have to deal with. Okay, title company needs that information. There can be a North Main and there can be a South Main. Okay, in my case, in my neighborhood, there's an east and a west, and 4 houses down from me across the street is my same street address, but it is I'm west and they're east, and we get that confused all the time. We get our mail crossed all the time. We get our packages from Amazon crossed, and then we have the occasional person that comes to visit, and they're like, nobody's answering the door, and they call me up, and I'm like, are you at a single-story house or a 2-story house? Well, we're the 2-story house. So lot number, block number, all that can be given off the tax records. If it's a rural property, most chances it won't have a lot number and a block number, but it will have a legal description, and that's what you're going to put in that third checked area over on the right hand side. So be aware of that. Make sure that you're comfortable with that. You have all that information, and primarily you want to make sure the person you're talking to is actually the real owner of the house. We see this all the time, where people are trying to sell other people's properties. That's illegal, but some people try to do it, and sometimes it's successful. We've had renters say, "Oh, well, yeah, I'll rent the property. I just thought we could make a quick buck on selling my landlord's property." Well, that's not going to work. Okay, so you want to, and there's times in there that it's an estate. We had one years ago that the gentleman we're negotiating with, it was an inheritance. It was a probate property. Do you have any brothers or sisters? No, I do not. Have you ever had any brothers or sisters? Because that's important. No, I have not. Okay, we get it to the title company. The title company does their due diligence. They say, oh, you know what? This guy's got a brother and a sister. And it's like, really? So call the guy up and say, hey, you've got a brother and a sister. Title company caught it. You can't sell it without their going on. He said, well, they don't count. What do you mean they don't count? Well, they don't count because my brother's in prison and my sister is gay. And we're like, no. That's not an area they don't count in. So you're going to have to get them on board with selling the house. And he's like, I don't want to split up the money. It doesn't matter. It's in probate, and each of you have a third of the property. So we were not able to close on that property because the guy was trying to figure out a way to sell it to maybe a cash investor that didn't work through a title company, that didn't have title. Now you can still close it. I could have still closed it without title insurance, and then the brother and sister can come back indefinitely whenever and demand they get each their third. So that's 2/3 of the price of the property. And they legally can do that because they're actually on title of the property. And there are investors that do this. I get calls on a not a regular basis, but I get 1 or 2 calls a year, 3 calls a year from investors that have bought a property and they didn't get title insurance, and then they find out that they're stuck. They're having to pay somebody. They're having to pay a child support lien. It's a probate. They're having to pay other people in there. We had one a while back that was, I think it was 5 heirs on it, and 1 heir has been missing since the 80s. And there's some areas you can work with on that. Title companies don't really like working that, but there are legal ways to work with that. Put an ad in the paper. Title company can walk you through that. Okay. Now, right here, what we have on the screen here is improvements. Okay, so this is in the in pretty much all contracts I've ever seen. So these are permanently built-in items. So one of the best examples that I can use on that is okay, good. So is if there's a ceiling fan, that's a permanently installed item. If it's hanging from the ceiling by one wire, it's permanently installed. Now, pictures normally aren't permanently installed unless somebody has screwed the picture in the wall with screws in there. Now, you may not want it, and that may not be an issue. But permanently installed items would be like a water heater, would be the HVAC, lighting fixtures, rose bushes in the front yard, trees in the yard, bushes, whatever, foliage, and stuff like surround sound speakers would be, attic fans, mailboxes, stuff like that. So you need to be very clear to your seller of what they're going to take and what they can't take. So if you're doing a complete remodel, you may be okay with them leaving, not leaving the towel bars because those are permanently installed, because you're going to be doing a total remodel, and you can go through and talk about those on an individual basis. But they can't take the toilets, they can't take the sinks. Now, the stove is considered a permanently installed appliance, but a refrigerator is not. A washer and dryer is not. Dishwasher is. Disposal under the dishwasher. So the list goes on and on. So be aware of the improvements and be aware of looking for that. So one of the areas that we're running into a lot right now are flat screen TVs and the mounts. The TVs are not considered permanently installed items or improvements, but the bracket on the wall is. And those are normally expected to stay. It's in the contract that they stay. If they don't stay, you make agreements with the seller. If it's a retail buy, for instance, and you're selling the property retail, and you're selling your own property, then you may want to go back and fix the hose on the wall where you had the TV mounts mounted, that are screwed in the wall, whatever it may be. So we have that in there. Once again, there's a list there. Just be aware of that and what you're working with on that basis, and how that works. So let me scoot over here to there we go. So exclusions, for instance, this is where you can write in that you may have an accessory that's going to be retained by the seller, and it must be delivered or must be removed before you close. So the improvement would be, let's say, a lighting fixture, a chandelier. They want to keep that chandelier. In most cases, if we're doing a remodel, that's not a big deal. It could be a big deal, but it may not. But we want to make sure that they understand how this works. Okay. So other accessories and related items would be, fireplace equipment or stuff like that. Gas logs is a good example. So when we're doing a sales contract, we normally have 3 spots in here to fill out. In the Texas contract, the top spot is cash. So how much cash are you bringing to the table? So if they're owner financing, you may not be bringing any cash to the table. If you're subject to, it may not be any cash to the table. If they're going to sum of financing or third-party financing, whatever it may be, so subject to, you're going to put the mortgage amount in there. If it's owner finance, you're going to put that amount in there, and you're going to click the seller finance addendum. If it's subject to, you're not going to click anything there because we're going to relate that further down in the area. And I go into a lot of detail on the subject to training that we have on our website, that we have available out there. Okay, so and this is our new website that we're working with right now. I just leave that on the bottom down there. So sales contract, very simple. You've got the 3, and the bottom one here is a sum of whatever cash and how much financing is going to be in there. Those 2 items are added together. So section A, section B equals section C. So want to make sure that that you're aware of that and how that works. And on the bottom of every page, you and the seller are both going to initial that. Okay. But if there's a lease, if you're buying the property from an investor and there are residential leases in place, then you need to know what that lease is. You need to know what the term of that lease is. Okay. So we were talking to some people the other day about a property. They're talking about doing a subject to on it, and they're losing a shirt. They did a 5-year lease about 6 months ago for about $50 more than the mortgage payment. That's including taxes and insurance. But guess what's going to go up next year? Definitely insurance. It's been going up forever, but taxes may or may not go up. And on a investment property, you're not going to get any tax breaks on that. You're not going to get a homestead exemption. You're not going to get a senior exemption. You're not going to get a military exemption or something on that basis. So you want to make sure that you understand where the leases are, what's in place, what's the agreement. They could have a lease out there for $1 a year to their brother-in-law, and you can't cancel that lease. You buy that property, that lease stays in place. It doesn't matter what. Even a bank foreclosure, when a bank forecloses on a property and it's a leased property, that lease stays in place until an agreement is made with the seller. Okay. With the tenant. Agreement is made in place with the tenant. Then there's fixture leases out there. That could be alarm systems. Solar panels are huge right now. Be careful of solar panels. Okay. And I've got some very good friends that are in sales of solar panels, and they're profiting off that. It is not for me. Okay. I've never seen it where I've never seen a return on investment with solar panels. Okay. And a lot of people say, oh, you can put the solar panels on it and you can now be the electric company for your tenant. I'm not going there. I am not going to be the electric company for my tenant. I have a hard enough time with some getting rent out on a normal basis. Okay. Then you have natural resources lease. Those would be like mineral leases and areas like that. So in every sale that I've ever been involved in every state I've been involved in, if there's mineral rights that are still attached to that property that have not been severed off, if you do not address it in the contract, it automatically conveys to the new buyer. So if you're buying properties and you have and there's minerals on that property, and the seller has not reserved those minerals on a separate addendum, then the buyer gets those minerals. So a real quick story, I love my stories. So a real quick story that I have here is I was representing, as a realtor, I'm representing a buyer buying a large commercial property on some acreage. And right on the other side of the fence of that property, they're drilling a gas well. And gas is very prominent, especially at the time, in the Fort Worth area in this part of Texas. And he says, do I get mineral rights? I said, they didn't say anything about it, but don't say anything. We just won't address it in the documents, and you're going to automatically get those mineral rights. And we go to closing. We meet at Starbucks before the closing, which is a couple of doors down. And I'm talking to him and his wife that are buying this investment property. He said, do I get minerals? And I said, they've not been addressed, but if there are minerals on that property, they're going to automatically convey to you. You do not say a word to anybody in the closing. Do not say anything to the title company. So we go in there, and we're sitting there without anybody in there. And I said, remember, don't say anything about the minerals. So the escrow officer comes in, the closer, and we close everything. Everything's signed, and congratulations, Mr. So-and-so. The property is now yours. He's like, great. Do I get the mineral rights? And she says, well, I don't know. Let me check on that. And she walks out of the room, and she calls the seller. And the seller says, no, I'm keeping those mineral rights. I've told everybody I'm keeping those mineral rights. Well, didn't tell us because we're not in negotiations with the seller. So we go in, and so she comes back in, and she says, actually, she didn't come back in. We left, and we're in the parking lot, and she runs out to us. Oh, we got something we need to take care of. And we go back in. I thought, well, maybe they had a sheet of paper they didn't initial or something on that basis. And she says, oh, well, I talked to the seller about the mineral rights that you brought up, and he's now refusing to sell the property. Even though he signed everything, he refuses to sell it because we haven't funded it yet. And so my buyer had to hire an attorney and threatened to sue the guy that was selling. The listing agent, I got my commission because I was the buyer's agent. The listing agent lost her commission on that because he had told her multiple times, I'm not getting rid of my minerals. I'm keeping my minerals. My customer had to negotiate through an attorney, and it was about $20,000 is what it cost him to have that attorney. get him those mineral rights. And I don't know how much of that may have gone to the attorney, how much of that may have gone to the seller. None of it went to me, and none of it went to the other agent that I'm aware of. So be aware of the minerals, and be aware where you're at on that, and understand how that works. If you don't bring it up during that process, you will probably get those minerals. So another real quick story on that. Another investor bought a property, and he's a wholesaler. So he turned around, and he hadn't closed on it, but he turned around. I'm sorry, he did close on it. He was, instead of doing a double close, he went in and closed on it, and then he had another buyer buying it. And he pulled, and I keep telling him, put those minerals, sever them out, put them into a trust, put them into your child's education fund, whatever that may be, but move those minerals off the property. Especially at the time here in Texas, they were very valuable at one time. And he pulls up to the property. The person he's selling to pulls up to the property with him, and the seller, they're walking to the property, and this other guy walks up and says, "Hey, are you Mr. So-and-so?" He says, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Oh, I'm here with such and such gas company. I'm here to write you a check for a 5-year lease, and I'm going to lease it, from you for $100,000. And he's ecstatic. He's fixing to get $100,000. And the person who just bought it from him looks at the guy and says, "Oh, that check needs to go to me because I just bought this property." And he lost out on $100,000. I think the whole sale was like $150,000. And that was common at the time. Not so common now in Texas, but who knows what the future brings. So be aware of the natural resource leases that you have here and what you've got. Okay. So at the top of each page on most contracts, you're going to put the address in. You're going to put the title company, and where it says earnest money and termination option, you're going to put the title company name, and you're going to put their address, because there can be multiple title companies out there. Oops, I lost that page. There can be multiple title companies out there that have the same name, and they're not owned by the same people. Okay. So, there may be an attorney that's using Chicago Title, and he or she has like 3 different locations, and there'll be another attorney across town that has 5 locations, also using the name Chicago Title. So be aware of that. So if you just put in there Chicago Title, it can be anywhere, but you need to put an address in there. And normally I'll sneak in there somewhere the phone number, and there's another page on here where you put the title company information, and you can actually add their address and phone number, and the closing, the closer or the escrow officer that you're dealing with at the title company in there. So if you're buying the property, you can control that unless it's a bank-owned property or a HUD property. HUD actually will let you use your own title company now. Back in the day, you had 2 title companies in Dallas-Fort Worth or in North Texas that you could close with on the HUD houses, and now they've given a little flexibility on that. There's not that many HUD houses out there available for investors. Okay, so you're going to put in there the earnest money. How much earnest money are you going to put in? That's a big question that a lot of investors ask. How much earnest money do I offer? Well, you're going to be closing that property, and you're going to be having to pay some closing costs. So it doesn't matter within reason. So for instance, if your closing costs are going to be, somewhere around $1,500, you can put $1,000 in, $500 in. I wouldn't put $25 or $100 in. I'd never go below $250, unless it's, even $250 is a low price property, because I'm going to get it back. It's going to credit back to me at closing, and I'm going to have an option in there. So if for whatever reason this sale doesn't go through within that agreed to option period, I get my earnest money back too. Now you have an option fee or let me put in here real quick. So, and then you can put in additional earnest money or escrow money into the deal so many days later. This is done a lot in commercial properties, done very seldom in residential properties. Okay, so we have the earnest money and the option fee in there. There's going to be a date area in here that's going to be in the next page that we see here. So this right here, termination option for so many days. People ask often, how many days is that going to be on a, so if you're selling the property and it's your sale, you want that as few days as possible. If you're buying the property, you want that as many days as possible. So you're going to reach out there and you're going to put in there how many days. So if I'm buying a property and I'm closing in 30 days, I'm probably going to put 29 days in there. If you're working, if there's a realtor on the other side, they're probably not going to agree to that. If it's an individual, they're going to probably be okay with that. If I'm selling, I'm probably going to put about 10 days in there, 7 to 10 days, somewhere in there for them to do their inspections and everything. An option on a contract can be your best friend, whether you're buying or you're selling. Okay, if you're selling, it shows good faith. If they come back and they find something wrong with the property, you gave them an option. You gave them the ability to go out and have the property inspected by a licensed inspector and to find any defects in that property and then negotiate those defects with you before they close on that property. If you're buying a property, it gives you a great window there to close on that property, to get your due diligence done, to make sure you have everything done right for the point of getting that property sold. Okay. And then let me jump over here. So further down the property, further down here, we have the title policy and the survey. Now I mentioned earlier on the title policy, it is a must for me to get a title policy on every property I close. Yeah, it's going to cost me little less than 1%. Usually it's about 0.8% of the sales price of the property. If it's a subject to, it's going to be whatever that loan amount is. It's not going to be the original price they bought it for. It's going to be whatever that loan amount, those 3 boxes that we had at the very beginning, the cash portion, the finance portion, and the total of those 2. So you're going to have the title policy. Most investment properties, the investor pays the title policy when they're buying the property. It's a negotiable item. There's 2 boxes there to check. You can have the seller do it, but you're going to find that a lot of times the attraction that you bring to the deal is they're not going to come to the table with any money, especially if you're doing a creative deal in there where their owner financing it out or whatever. They don't want to bring any money to the table, and you're going to put in there the title company you're working with. I have investors that often will not buy a title policy, and then they're calling me and they're like, "Hey, I can't get any answers from anybody on this, but I just found out there's a child support lien, there's other errors on the property, there's a second mortgage on the property, whatever. How do I get out of this?" You don't. You're going to have that property forever as a rent house, and you just got to be aware. You just got to be aware that things come up. Mowing liens are huge. The city will charge $25 to mow that lawn, and then they'll charge $275 for the documents to be processed. So it's a $300 lien every week they're mowing that property, or every other week, or whatever it may be. Every time a neighbor complains, and that property was mowed before you bought it, before you owned the property, and you owe $5,000 in mowing liens, which is not uncommon. And you're not going to get out of those. The city's going to, they're going to attack you on those. Okay. And then survey. Oh my gosh, surveys are always a big deal. When you're selling that property, you're going to need to have that survey in place. You're going to need to have that put into place. So if you're buying that property, you want to ask the sellers for their survey. Guess what? They don't know where that survey's at. Okay. So you bought this property, or you refinanced this property 3 years ago. Where are those documents when you bought that property you refinanced? Oh, it's on our file cabinet. Well, in there's a survey. Oh, is there really? I didn't know there was a survey in there. Now, there's a lot of people who say, well, I'll just go down to the county and I'll get a copy of the survey. Guess what? I don't know of any case that survey is actually recorded on the county level. Okay. Just understand that survey is probably not going to be anywhere in county records that you're going to be able to find. Um, and well, I'll go back to the title company. Hey, what title company did you close at? I don't know. Yeah, there you go. So they don't know what title company they closed at, and you can't call any title company. And even if you do, and it's more than a couple of years since they've closed, the title companies say, you know what, we put that into I'm blank on the word here, but we put that into our files, and we don't keep those files on premises. Those are kept in a storage building somewhere in Hackensack or whatever. And you know what? We're not even going to go look for them. We can't. Why would we pay an employee, what we pay them by hour, legal person to go to a storage building, pull a file cabinet, and start pulling that for a survey? We're not going to do that. So a survey is going to cost you about $700 in today's market. It's going up all the time. So if you're listening to this a couple of years down the road, it may even be higher. Now, it also has in here that if there's an adjustment, a shortage in the area, normally it doesn't happen on residential properties, but it can happen on other properties that are out there, like rural properties. Or in my neighborhood, we had a little corner of the property that years ago the seller just it wasn't worth anything to them because it was like a little pie shaped. It was 10 feet at the widest point and went down to it was about 10 or 15 feet long, and it went it was pie shaped. And he just fenced it off and gave it to the neighbor. So, hey, you can use this and square up your backyard. They never did anything legal. So the guy who bought it, which didn't get a survey when he bought it, realized one day, oh, that land is mine. And he got into a feud with a neighbor, and it got really nasty. I was waiting for gunshots. It was at that point. I'm really waiting for gunshots to happen. So so they both approached me because they know that I'm a realtor. And they know that I deal with, weird stuff all the time. And they both approached me at separate times. They didn't come together. I want you to fix this. Or I can't fix it. Y'all have to negotiate this out. Well, the one guy says, well, I didn't know it. I've owned this property 5 years now. And I've been paying property taxes on that little square, that little triangle shaped for 5 years. I'm thinking, yeah, you probably paid $3, $5, whatever. It's not a lot of land. Majority of your county taxes that you have on this is going to be your structure. Okay, not the lot's going to be a value, but that little corner of the lot, that's not going to be a lot of value there. So the amendment to read shortages in areas. So if there's a shortage out there and there's some adjustments that had to be made, you have a choice here. Once again, there's two boxes: buyer and the seller. Okay, so be aware of that. And so our next one here is back in this survey. Okay, so in the Texas TREC contract and most of the other states that I've seen, there's some changes in verbiage on this in other states, and I've seen it not even being addressed in some sales contracts that some of the gurus put out there you find on Google or whatever. So the survey is a big deal. You're always going to want to ask. You're always going to want to ask the seller for the survey, because it's going to save you. One day you're going to sell that house and it's going to save you money. Now, if the house has been added onto, or if the fence line's been changed any way whatsoever, any concrete been poured on the property for a storage building, for instance, then that survey is going to be invalid, but it's going to give you at least you're going to know the footprint of the property. Okay. So, be aware of that. So you change that property, you add a room to it, the survey is going to not be valuable as far as the next buyer, but it's going to be valuable for you because you're going to know the footprint of the property. Okay. So let me go forward to the next page here. And so this is more of the TREC contract on the survey. So the first one up here is essentially just saying that within so many days, the seller is going to provide you the existing survey. Okay. And if seller fails to furnish the existing survey, and we have an affidavit, it's called a T-47 affidavit in Texas. That's very important that the seller signs and has notarized, stating that nothing's been changed in that survey from the time they've owned that property. No new rooms added, no fences changed, footprint of the fence has changed. They can replace the existing fence there. That's fine. But if they move the fence anyway whatsoever, or whatever that may be. So the if the seller fails to furnish that on checkbox number 1 here, and they do not give you a copy of the existing survey, then they get to pay for the survey 3 days before closing. Okay, this is a big area here. Once again, check boxes, they can buy it or you can buy it, one of the two. If you're doing creative financing, if you're not working with getting a new loan on the property from a lender, and you don't want a survey and you're comfortable with the property lines, you don't have to buy a survey when you close. Okay, it's a good idea that you do, but you don't have to do it. If you're getting it financed and you're getting a mortgage on it, you're getting a loan from a bank or whatever, they're probably going to require you to have a survey in place that they approve. Okay, so it could be a new survey or it could be an old survey, whatever it may be. So in checkbox number 2, so effective date of this, the buyer shall obtain a new survey. Okay, a lot of realtors, you'll see a lot of realtors do this. They're going to put a really short window time frame in there. It's okay to put a short window time frame in the first one. It's not okay to do it in the second or third. You never want to commit to a time or to a survey while you're still under option. Okay, if you're not sure you're going to close it or not, and the title comes to you and said, "Hey, bud, I need you to write a check for $700 and get this survey rolling," be careful of that. If you don't do that and you have in there that you're going to buy a new survey and you don't buy a survey, that does give the seller an out of the contract. We talked about that earlier, that it's a legal binding contract, but that is an out of the contract. You're not performing. You said I would perform. You're not performing. Legally, they can fight to get you out of the contract. So be careful when you're putting that in there. And number 3 in there is the seller is going to provide the survey. So number 2 is you as a buyer, the investor is going to do the survey. Number 3 is the investors going to do the survey. Okay. Now right here, we have in place. That was the same one. Hang on, let me go to the next page. There we go. So then you have objections. Once you get the title, there's a difference there. You get title work, and you get title work and you get title survey. Okay, title work and a title policy. So be aware of that. So if you're going to use that property as a rental property, you need to put that in there. If you're going to use it as a beauty shop in one room of the house, you need to put that in there to make sure that the city will allow that to come into place. There are some cities out there that won't even let you hold an Amway meeting in your house, okay, because of traffic, whatever. Airbnbs are a big thing right now. So be aware of that. So be aware what you have there. And if you have any objections in there whatsoever, you need to put that in there. Big thing in right now is Airbnbs. If you're going to go into Arlington, Texas, and you're buying a property and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to turn this into an Airbnb, and you find out that only a certain radius around Jerry's World, which is the Cowboy Stadium, if you don't know it, that's the football players that don't go to the Super Bowl. Well, they can go, but they're not participating. So but you can't do an Airbnb in most of Arlington, only a very small area around what is called the entertainment district, the Cowboys and Six Flags and all that kind of stuff. So you want to be aware of that. You want to know what the regulations are to do an Airbnb. Legally, they're saying you can't do an Airbnb in Fort Worth, even though there's millions of dollars worth of Airbnb nights done every month in Fort Worth. They don't have anybody. They don't have a way out there to inspect and shut them down. They don't have a department for that. So people still do Airbnbs, even though the city of Fort Worth says, no, we don't want you to do those. Okay. So that's where you would put that in objections and what you're going to use that property for. And if it comes back in the title work that you cannot put an Airbnb there, you have the option to get out of the contract. Okay. So HOA, Homeowners Association, POA, Property Owners Association, be aware. Be aware of where you're at with that. Okay. there are some expenses there. If you're selling the property, if you're buying the property, you've got to be aware of if there's a mandatory, not a voluntary, but a mandatory HOA, homeowner association, property owners association. Be aware of that. There's some areas out there that are some gated communities that the transfer fee for a property, whenever you buy that property, can be very expensive. We've been involved in properties that had a $7,000 or $8,000 transfer fee. Somebody's paying that. Either the seller's paying it or the buyer's paying it. So in most of those neighborhoods, they're not ever going to be wholesaled out, because if it's $8,000, it's a $16,000 fee from the time the wholesaler gets it to the time, if he closes on it and sells it to an investor, there's going to be an $8,000 if he closes on one, $8,000 if the seller sells it to a buyer, the buyer rehabs it and sells it later, there's another $8,000 out there. So, now you're $20,000+ into this deal on just transfer fees. So you want to be aware of that. And sometimes they can be very expensive. So there's a form for that. It says how much the buyer is going to be liable for, and the rest of it, the seller is going to be liable for. So you want to be very aware of the HOA, any membership fees that are out there, any membership dues that are out there. So we're going to be wrapping this up in just a second, and go to the next page here. There we go. Public improvements. Okay, we have this in here. You have a MUD, Municipal Utility District, which is a water co-op. Not city water. It is owned by the members of the district. We have that in electrical. We have that in water, for instance. We have a water control improvement district, which is wastewater regulations. And if the county comes in there, or the city, or whatever, they come in there and they decide they're going to put a drainage ditch in, they charge everybody in that area a portion of the cost of that drainage ditch. So you want to be aware of that. And then a public utility district, what's called a PID. Could charge a homeowner for improvements or maintenance. Good example of this, there's a subdivision out west of Fort Worth, and they built this big bridge over I-20, and everybody lives there and gets to pay for that bridge. And so every single month out of their HOA, there's a line in there that their money is contributing to the bridge over I-20. So be aware of that. Be aware of knowing what that is. If there's any of that in there, there's probably going to be an addendum that's going to be involved in that. Okay, so be aware of how that works. Okay, and then so we're gonna stop there for the contract. If you want some more detail in here, you can go to realimpactcourses.com. We're in the process now. It'll be under the Subject to courses, but we're probably going to put together a contract course just so you can purchase information on how to fill out contracts and get the documents for those contracts. So we have that available. Will be available on Real Impact Courses in the next couple of weeks. We're updating that on a consistent basis, and we want to make sure that you are comfortable and aware of how to do these, making sure you're using the right contracts in place, making sure that you're knowledgeable of those contracts, because the last thing you want to do is get in front of a seller and start fumbling around and not knowing what the contract says. And they say, well, what does this mean? What does this title thing, title flood thing mean? Well, if you're in North Texas, it means nothing, because we're not going to have a hurricane and surge water come up into North Texas. But if you're down in Houston, that's going to be a big thing right there down there on the coast. Okay, so there's some areas in there you'll look at and you'll say, hey, this isn't relevant to us. When I'm negotiating a contract, once again, I'm going to do the letter of intent, and I'm going to get that signed, and then I'm going to transfer everything over into, in my case, into a state promulgated contract, and I'm going to have it mirror image that letter of intent. Then I'm going to go back to the sellers and say, hey, you know what? Title company wants me to put this on this contract. I'm okay with it. I transferred everything over. Here's a copy of the letter of intent we did, and here's where I moved everything over. So be aware of that. Make sure you have that in place. And I really do appreciate you being on the call tonight. And I apologize. I'm doing it by myself. So if you're putting things into the chat, I haven't been able to respond to that because I'm here by myself, and lots of stuff going on right now, and with everybody else. And I apologize that I can't react to the chat right now. So with that, really appreciate you coming in. We'll talk to you later. See you first and third Sunday nights of every month. And hopefully you get something out of this. Talk to you later. Bye. There we go.